Hey guys, welcome back to the Raising Rices podcast. We're here again, bringing you the discussions from our library. Hopefully they're impactful to your life and the legacy you leave behind. So we have a fun one to talk about today. One that if you know us personally, probably won't be a surprise to you.
But it is a legitimate conversation that should be happening, especially as technologies are just increasing tenfold.
Yeah, I was listening to something just this week and they were talking about AI and how AI is the next technology that everybody's going to be running to get ahead of and to be the best at, and the next major field of growth. And they were comparing it to social media.
Yeah.
So here we are on social media, all over the place. Is on social media all the time, it seems like. That's where we get our news. That's where we get our theology, sometimes for better or worse. And is that next space where major companies are going to be vying for your attention. And so as we consider that, we consider this topic, which is it better to reduce friction or make friction?
Yeah, and it's interesting, like, literally, we are on social media right now.
Yeah.
Or you're watching us through YouTube or
Podcasts.
And there has been fruitful, good teachings or good things that have come through reducing the frictions in our life.
Yeah, wonderful connections, tremendous encouragement in the church as a whole. All of a sudden, ideas are shared rapidly. There's good things, but then there's bad things too. You think about the advent of the real, like, celebrity pastor and how impactful it can be when somebody fails very publicly, and or the influence that somebody that is teaching maybe a wrong doctrine can have on a tremendous swath of people that they would have never had impact on in a day with more friction of communication. So goods and bads.
Yeah, and what we want to do today is we want to talk about kind of like our baseline to decide for our family. Is this reduction of friction, this ease, if you will, profitable for our family, or is it not? And through our conversations on this podcast, we hope to bring up some elements maybe that you have thought about or you haven't thought about. Talk about some of the ramifications, the challenges that come with reducing friction too quickly, or in your family, if you don't have an element of hardship, what can happen?
Yeah, I think just even thinking about that conversation, you're really stepping into a pretty bold space, right? Like, how many of us really think through a decision as we make it or as we just live it? We get in our car, we drive to the store, we do whatever it is in our life. Are we thinking about the ramifications of how much friction do I have in this moment? Is it making it easier for me to sin? Or is it making it easier for me to live a righteous life that glorifies God? And those things can just happen. Or is this something that builds my character? Or is this something that degrades my character or allows a trait that I don't want to be a primary part of my character to take center stage?
So you're asking your question, like, what is the cost? Like, what is the cost of using this new technology or this system that you have in place? And there's a lot of conversations right now in the health industry, in the health world, about some of the costs of finding newer, cheaper, faster ways to do things. One example that comes to mind is the microwave.
Yeah.
You know, we were looking for, as a society, something that we could reheat things in an instant. Now, confession, we don't have a microwave. And it's actually not because we didn't consider having a microwave.
Yeah.
When we were building our house, we had a spot for a double oven, and it could be either oven or microwave and then oven underneath. And we thought about looking at the microwave and oven, and it was actually like $2,000 more.
It was pretty absurd
To have a microwave and an oven combo.
And we already weren't huge microwave people.
It's true.
And so we just bit the bullet and went with double oven, no microwave. And we've been living that way for almost 2 years now.
There is a cost, though.
Oh, yeah. There's no quick reheat on a leftover dish.
No. And like when my dad was here for 10 days, he had to rewarm his coffee on the stove. And I'm sure that was
So old fashioned.
such an inconvenience, but he never said anything about it. Viewing that, and I'm thinking, okay, that is a cost. But then you have to look at it. Everything's like checks and balances, right? Like, so what is the opposing cost or the benefit, if you will, of not having this friction reduced in your life?
Yeah, and sometimes that cost is that the technology itself can be harmful, and sometimes it's the benefit of making you think more carefully before you pop something out of the fridge and eat it.
Yeah.
You know, like sometimes you just figure out ways to do that anyway, but
Sure.
there is it impacts every part of your life, you know? Maybe it makes a simple decision like your microwave, maybe that just prevents you from eating a processed food from the store that's like a quick microwave type of meal and makes you cook more things from scratch. And in that case, you could argue that adding inconvenience to your life is actually healthier.
Yeah. I heard this one story that the Amish people, when you think of like using no technologies, you definitely think of the Amish.
Sure.
Right. But someone was saying that the way that they go about deciding if a technology is going to be considered in their community or not, because some Amish communities do have telephones,
Right.
or they can use certain farm equipment that has different technologies built into it. And the way that they go about discovering if this technology specifically is good or right for their community is that they'll ask themselves, is this promoting relationships and peace, or is it hindering it? And
it's a great question.
Yeah.
It's thought provoking, right?
Definitely.
It gets you thinking about what are the impacts of this thing that seems convenient in the moment.
Yeah, and it's so funny, even just thinking of the microwave, like we have gotten into like such a fast culture and a like fast, get it done, get it now. But like perhaps the Amish were thinking and talking about when you are doing that at, like 1 minute fast speeds, then you're not cultivating skills and relationships in the kitchen. And I can attest now, having, daughters and sons that enjoy being in the kitchen and making things, that those relational connection time in the kitchen is beautiful. And it reminds me when we were living, in a trailer for 18 months and we had to hand wash all of our dishes. I definitely struggled at times to have a happy heart about that. But then I would look over and I would see who is washing the dishes with me. And It was my kids. We were doing it together. It was most definitely promoting relationships. And the peace came with knowing that I was spending time with them and having conversation.
Yeah, and it also promotes a peace and a thankfulness amongst the family members when you arrive at the table.
Together.
And somebody has prepared something for you.
Yes.
And there's a clear evidence that it took more than popping it in a microwave, right? It was handmade and baked and served. And then there's a relational thankfulness together with that.
Definitely.
As I die here.
Drink your water. There are some things, though. There are some technologies that maybe aren't as easily identifiable if it does promote relationships and does promote peace. Like I was thinking about notifications on your phone versus writing things down. I can attest that I rely on those notifications, definitely, because one, I'm out of habit. I'm out of habit of writing things down. However, I do have a handwritten calendar, and I was talking to someone, we were out and about, and we were talking about getting together, and I was like, well, I'll have to go home and check my calendar.
Did they laugh at you?
Yeah, I did.
That's awesome.
Phone. And then as I was thinking about that, and I was messaging them later, I realized that gave me an opportunity to evaluate and not give a yes or a no in that moment.
Yeah.
And talk to Darren about hey, is this okay if we do that? So there was some benefit that came from it. There was inconvenience, don't get me wrong. There was friction.
But I think we're used to that, just instant decision or instant gratification, but writing something down maybe makes you slow down a little bit around that thing, whether it's a list of these are the things I need or it's a list of these are the things we need to do, or it's
Mhm.
your calendar, maybe there's a benefit to adding that moment of friction, like you're
Maybe.
saying.
And that is something though that has to be decided per family,
Right.
right?
Yeah, of course, like we always talk about in this podcast, we're not prescribing like you need to do this or you can't do that, and we're not seeking to bind anybody's heart with a conviction of our own. We're just presenting an idea that says, "Hey, have you thought about your life and how it relates to these things?" And the next one I think is super impactful and maybe a little bit more cut and dry as than phone notifications versus writing things down. But just another example of this is like the advent of TV versus reading,
Yeah.
and the engagement and the mental imagination and imagery that comes from reading versus the consumption, pure consumption of a television show.
I was being told the story about this family who wanted to prioritize reading and togetherness and family games over watching TV. And so they gathered their family together and they asked them, what do you think would help provide, I'm going to use the word friction, to make it so this wasn't just readily available, easy, and the choice to instead read or play a game or have conversation was more on the forefront. And now I'm going to be coughing. This family said that the conclusion they came to was that they were going to hide the remote.
Nice.
That they were going to put, because they lived in like a 3-story house. They were going to put the remote on the very bottom, like down in the basement. And then they had, I don't know, someone staying with them for extended time or something. And they had gotten in the habit of not watching TV because they didn't have the remote.
Right.
And then this guest that was staying with them comes up from downstairs and he's like, I don't know if you know, but I found the remote down here.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, so even in decisions like that, right? You add friction. That adding of the friction is a good thing because it maybe even just makes you slow down and think about the choice that you're making.
It's not like readily available, right? Like you're like, actually, we were trying to read more. Maybe we'll try that. Or I want to talk to this person about this, and it's easier to talk to because the TV's not on, or whatever.
Yeah, or think about the intentionality that can come with a process that has more friction.
Yeah.
There, instead of like, we live in such a text message society, right?
Definitely.
We'll just like fire like 2 sentences at a time if you're lucky. And that is sometimes the bulk of our communication, where it takes more thoughtfulness sometimes, and I think in a good way, thoughtfulness if you're considering like writing somebody a letter versus shooting them a text. Now, I'm very terrible at this.
I was say, when's the last time you wrote a letter?
Yeah, I can't remember.
So it's a conviction moment, right?
Yeah. But how considerate to think about something like that. Like, does it make sense to hold on to a long form, like more friction filled process than to do something that's so instant?
I feel like I have a lot of stories around this like handwritten idea right now, probably because it's like heavily on my mind. The kids and I, for homeschooling, have incorporated once a week we do letter writing, and we write to, right now, people in our family primarily, but also friends. And it takes time. I mean, like, it probably takes the kids 30 minutes, like half an hour to write one letter. Granted, they're getting faster, and so hopefully, as they get older, it won't be as long, but it's that time that goes into it, and it's actually like quite a skill to learn. Like you need to, you can't talk about yourself the whole time. I tell them, right? Like, you got to ask questions. You do need,
somebody's gonna write you back, right? Like,
you do need to give like information to the person, but again, in moderation. And it's been really pretty fruitful to see a lot of the grandparents write back, and now they have little boxes of letters from family members. And it was inspired by several people in the homeschooling community, but this one family was sharing a testimony that their grandma would write them constantly, and they again have the little shoebox of letters, and then she passed away, and they had that memory piece, though, that memory and that like relational bond because of those letters. And I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Am I going to write a letter though to like my doctor? No.
Right.
Email is so helpful for that. So there is definitely push and shove when it comes to discovering if the friction is worth it.
Right. Yeah. When does the friction really make sense? Another one that we're living right now, which is kind of fun, I think, is just a consideration that do you value something more when you understand the work that goes into it?
Yeah.
And so we have like a proper propane forced air heat in our home, but we really don't use it. And we live where it's pretty cold. And so, but we heat most of our house with a wood burning fireplace. And there is an appreciation of the service to one another that goes into tending the fire. And there's an appreciation of the work that it takes to produce heat. And I think it brings the family together a little bit. I think that there's an element where the work is noticed. If you pay a propane bill and whatever, dad works and then the money goes out of the account and it pays the propane bill and the house is just magically warm, it's a wonderful thing. It's a benefit of the frictionless culture that we sometimes live in. But I think not always, but then you lose the appreciation of warmth. Maybe. And so for us, little things like that, I think are fun. We do the same thing with some of our food that we eat.
Yeah, but coming quickly back to like the wood and the fireplace, it's also a skill.
Right.
Like it's a skill to start a fire, to continue that fire going. And our sons primarily take that job on when dad's not available, or they'll ask to do it with you, for sure. And then also with the warmth, it's like a congregational gathering point is around the fire.
Yeah, and so instead of the whole house being equally warm, the warmth radiates from a center hub.
Yeah.
And so in the chilly morning and in the evening, it draws the family together to that place. It's kind of fun.
But you were also alluding to farm life.
Yeah, just like when you raise a chicken and then collect the eggs from it, and then you eat those eggs, you realize like the work that goes into it, the care that goes into watching over an animal that then produces something for you.
Similar to a garden.
Right.
I think too, it's sad though that there is times where children, especially, and even adults for that matter, don't recognize the work that goes into the food that you're buying at the store, and they don't realize, like bacon comes from pigs, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like these things don't translate, and because you just buy it at the store, you're not seeing the whole process, you're not experiencing the process, you take for granted the work that goes into it. Even as simple as like this podcast, we enjoy doing it so much because it's definitely a relational thing for Darren and I. It comes out of our conversation, and then we would just want to encourage others with it. But we have grown in our appreciation for other podcasts.
Oh, right.
And it actually has made us want to donate money to other podcasts because of
They're just faithfully encouraging saints.
Because of the work that goes into it and the encouragement that it does provide for families and stuff. But that's another thing.
But to circle back to that friction element, is it less friction to drive to the store and buy eggs? 100%, right?
Yeah.
Is it less friction to buy your bacon perfectly, cured and packaged? Sure is. But do you lose the appreciation for what you're consuming? I think you do.
Definitely. And the skill. You most definitely, even if you have appreciation, even if you grew up on a farm and now you're buying eggs because you're like, I'm done with that. You understand? The skill and the workers are reduced when we don't have some of that friction in our lives.
Yeah. So positive outcomes, though, of friction. I think a couple of different categories that we can really consider these things kind of falling into, I think. And you jump in here if there's more that are on your mind. I think that it does, when there's more friction, it builds the work ethic and it builds the family dynamic as a team together.
Definitely.
Because all of a sudden, instead of living this frictionless life where
solo,
self-centered, frictionless pathway, you're dealing with friction and overcoming it together.
Yeah. And then the reward is great from that.
Right. And I think that's the second element, right? Is that you value the reward in a different way when you know that you worked hard and you contributed to produce it. Like both as the parents and the leaders in the family, but also the children. I think they really value having contributed to that. And I think, it's so easy for us to equate it to like raising chickens and pigs and stuff.
Because that's what we're doing.
But I think that it can be in tons more areas of that. I think of like when Madeline works hard to sew a blanket.
Yes.
Like, could you go, like you were just commenting on this the other day, could you go buy a dress for cheaper? 100%. Yep. Go to Walmart, buy a dress. It will be cheaper than buying the fabric and spending the time to sew a dress. Yeah. But there's something like invested and craftsman about having made the thing.
And ultimately, I was listening to a gal who is a seamstress talk to me, went way over my head. So she has definitely counted the cost of this. And I am just now having my eyes open to it. But when we choose to buy affordable, quote unquote, or made overseas or cheap clothing, we are reducing not only the skill and the value, like Darren's saying, but we are causing a domino effect for the fashion industry and for the jobs here in America, and for, there could be consequences like child labor in other areas. I mean, like she was going deep, and I was like, wow, yeah. All over buying something cheap.
Right.
Like cheap because I can't afford, a designer brand, but even designer brands are the same thing.
Yeah. Or the American made kind of brands of clothing.
I think that, I can't account it to a year. I probably could do more research to figure that out. But I think that as we started wanting more ease of life, as we wanted less friction, we made compromises without counting the cost long term. And here's an example just right now in our life with AI. We talked about that. In the beginning, when the, Chat GPT was coming out and all these things, and people were like, hey, you can just go into Chat GPT and just say, write me a book about gardening, and then you just take that information and you publish it,
right?
And then you can make $2,000 to $25,000 a month. I don't know, like, what I'm talking about though. Like, you see those reels, you hear those conversations, those quote unquote business ideas, and I logged on to Chat GPT because I was like, wait, I want to know what this is about. Like, how are people doing this? And I didn't follow through on it because I just had like a little nagging, but it was like, hey, look at this, flash, ease, money, all the awesome pros. And then we did not quite take a step back to say, okay, what are the ramifications of AI? There is a whole now division of lawyers and whatnot that are defending people who have severe things happen to them because of AI, like suicide. I can't tell you the name of the app right now, but there's some app that it's an AI driven app and it's geared towards teenagers, and it is like telling them to like harm their parents. It's like isolating them away from community and family so that they're just friends with this AI app. Like, I mean, that sounds extreme, right? That sounds like horrible. And it is actually happening because we have not counted the costs, or we haven't slowed down because we're just in this like rat race to who's going to have the best next? AI, that we're not looking at the big picture. And that's something that is facing us right now. But these some of the things that we're sharing has faced generations past, and we will face more. AI is not going to be the end of the story.
No, there's always something, because what was the curse? The curse of Genesis 3 was that man would have to work the ground.
And toil.
Right.
Toil,
it
would be
and
hard.
Sweat. That work would be difficult. And man's sinful nature, we want it to be easy.
Yeah.
And is there benefit? Like, did God allow us wise minds to create technology that have made a world where we can cultivate, like we also have a dominion mandate, right? To go and tend the world, right? And to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, right? And subdue it. Like, that's also a command. And could we do that without tractors and planes and just like wonderful things that are technology? It would be a lot harder. Like, those things have allowed us to do what we've done, and science continues to allow us to learn how to turn deserts into areas that produce rainfall and crops can be grown in, right? So there's good to technology,
For
but we
sure.
have to watch carefully and make sure that in our sinful nature, we're not making things so frictionless in certain areas that we cause detriment to ourselves, because we're
Right.
fulfilling our flesh instead of fulfilling the mandate that we've been given.
So that would be the third, I think you were alluding to, the third positive outcome of having friction in your life is that it requires you to navigate truth and stand for truth. And it's a call and a plead to parents and to ourselves that it is even more imperative that we look at the whole picture when things are new, when everybody in the crowd is doing something, and when it appeases our sinful desires,
Right.
like money, we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier, pleasure. So when those things are like, oh, well, this would, hey, look at this. This is going to make my life easier because I'm going to make some money, or, this is going to fill this desire in my life. Then we kind of have to be like, wait, pull the reins back and take a little bit of a deeper dive.
Yeah, and I think too, there's a relational element of this topic that we can consider too. And that is that we live in a culture today that wants everybody to believe in their truth, and that wants truth to be subjective, and wants us to all just love and get along. And I think that it is imperative as Christians with a biblical worldview that we understand that relationally standing for truth is going to also cause friction.
For sure.
So maybe that's a full episode for
Yeah.
another episode, but consider that. Consider that in the end of this conversation, that as we consider friction, as we think about that, that might not just be physical friction, but sometimes emotional or relational friction is necessary. It is good, right? There's not the Bible is not without good examples of where interpersonal friction was God's plan. Somebody obeyed what God said to do, and that caused friction between them and somebody else. And so consider that as a potentially good thing too, when done in love, of course.
Definitely. Well, this was a very helpful conversation for Darren and I. So we just pray that it will stimulate some thoughts for you. And whether or not you feel the same way about reducing friction in your life, as far as the exact examples we gave, maybe it'll just have you open up your eyes to different things, different either technologies or systems that you have in place that maybe need to be reevaluated.
Yeah. We're in a constant journey of reevaluation. And so even when we come on a podcast like this and we talk about these things, it's not because we've always thought this way, and it's not because this is the only way we'll ever think, but it's because we're hopefully constantly growing in our sanctification and in our consideration about how to best lead and disciple our children as we raise up the next generation. So we pray it's a blessing to you, and have a great week. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.